Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Breath of Hope. Chapter 3, Breathe Again. Rayla sighed as she looked around the clearing they had come across. This will do. We can stay here for a bit. Good. I feel like I've been awake all night. Ezran groaned, sitting down against a tree and rubbing his feet. With an exhausted sigh, Callum sat down beside the human. I'm tired too. It's all right, Callum. It's all right, Callum. We can stop for a bit. Right, Rayla? We can't afford to stop for too long, but yeah, long enough. She pulled the bundle off her back and passed it to Callum. Here, change into these. You'll feel better for it. Walking away to a rock, she sat down on top of it. The dragon prince looked at the clothing and nodded, removing his rags and throwing them away. As he started to remove his pants, Rayla blushed a slight pink and quickly turned her back to him. He hissed a few times as the clothes touched his painful sores and bruises. But eventually he got the clothes on, an undershirt with pale trim at the edges and a belt around his middle, a blue jacket on top. Rayla had already cut 2 holes in the back so he could get them over his wings, which were now covered with a long dark red cloak. It was partly a scarf, so it would work well for hiding his mouth and fangs. Plus the hood would conceal his horns. He had a pair of dark gray trousers and brown boots, while in the pocket of the trousers he found a pair of brown fingerless gloves. They were perfect for his still sore hands and wrists. Ezran chuckled as he watched the prince look over his new clothes. Wow, Callum, the look suits you, but you have the trousers on backwards. My tail won't go otherwise, he explained, groaning and sitting back against the tree. He looked up at the night sky. I forgot what the sky looks like, he admitted softly. Yeah, the stars are pretty, aren't they? The human yawned, holding on to the bait and leaning on the older boy so as carefully as he could, knowing he was still hurt and weak. The prince smiled and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his tail shifting to wrap around them both and keep them warm while they slept. Rayla smiled at the tender scene and nodded. You should get some sleep too, Callum. You're still weak. Shaking his head, he whimpered. I don't want to. Callum, you need to rest, she sighed, walking over to him. I don't want to, he repeated, turning his head away. Why not? Because I'm scared I'll wake up there again, he sobbed, tears falling down his face. Rayla stared at him, and once she was sure Ezran was still asleep, she reached out and wiped his tears away. Callum, I promise this is all real. You really are safe, and we will get you home. How can I know? How can I know this isn't a dream? That you're real? Unsure how to answer the question, the Moonshadow Elf sighed, thinking for a moment, before an idea popped into her mind. Give me your hand, she said, holding out her own. Callum, still crying, looked confused at the request. Why? So I can prove this isn't a dream. Tilting his head a little, he slowly held out the hand that wasn't holding Ezran. Taking it, she carefully moved his hand to her chest, right over her heart. Listen, can you feel that? Callum frowned and closed his eyes for a bit, feeling what she was trying to show him. He felt it, a steady, calm beat below his hand. That's my heart, Rayla explained. My heart. No dream can fake that. See? It's not a dream. You are free and safe and with friends. Opening his eyes, he stared at her through the tears. I'm free. Yes, and we'll get you home, she promised, stroking his hair and tucking a bit behind his ear. Now, to do that, you need your strength back. I'll be right here all night watching over you, okay? So lie back and try to sleep. Staring at her for a while, he mentally wondered if he really should sleep. Eventually, Callum decided that he'd risk it. He took his hand off her chest and leaned against the tree a little more, pulling his cloak over his body for extra warmth, and closed his eyes. Rayla watched until he fell asleep, and moved back to a rock to keep a lookout. As the night continued to pass, she looked at the second ribbon on her left wrist, and glared at it before trying to pull it free. She tried biting her way through it, but with no success. She frowned, holding her hand out and over it and calling out various commands. Unbind yourself. Unbind thyself. Nothing changed. Unbindo. She tried once more before giving up with an exasperated sigh. There was a grunt from the other side of the clearing, and she panicked for a second, worrying that one of the boys might have woken up. But it was just fate that was staring at her from over the dragon's tail. She glared back at the toad. Don't judge me, she told him. So what? I'm talking to my ribbon thingy. How is that any worse than talking to, whatever it is you are? Bait growled and licked his eye. Rayla rolled her eyes and turned her back on them. But a bell from the city was still close enough to be heard. It drew her attention, and guilt filled her chest, knowing what it meant. She looked at Ezran, unable to bring herself to tell him what had happened, and turned just to keep watch. A few times during the night, she heard Callum whimper, and was worried he'd wake up, but each time he appeared to have settled back down. Eventually, the sky lightened, and the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. Rayla felt wrong for doing it, but she walked over to the pair and shook each one awake. Come on, you two. We need to get moving. The pair woke up slowly, yawning and stretching. Callum woke first, blinking as he saw the outside world. It wasn't a dream, he whispered, standing up and leaving the human behind. As he stood, he felt his jaw drop, looking skyward. Blue. It's blue, he whispered with a smile. Rayla looked up as well. Yeah, it's the sky. I'd forgotten, he confessed, still staring upwards. I'd forgotten it was blue. I tried to remember, but I never could. He stepped forward towards the clearing. The sun peeked out over the trees and warmed his face. He slowly closed his eyes, and after a moment took a deep breath. The smell of the trees and the grass and the dirt and the warmth all made a smile come to his lips. He couldn't resist taking an even deeper breath. Beside him, Rayla smiled to herself and realized this was probably the first time he'd seen the sky in years. And maybe there was hope for the Dragon Prince, for the future, and for all of Xadia. Ezran had somehow gotten up and walked over to Callum, watching him with a smile. Callum, you okay? He turned to the small boy and smiled so happily that he could have sworn there were tears in his eyes. I'm free, he said before falling to his knees, hugging the young human tightly, and sobbing into his shoulder. I'm free, he sniffled, then looked at Rayla, holding his hand out to her. Once she placed her hand in his, he pulled her towards him, catching her off guard and pulling her into his hug. For a while, the trio just hugged the prince, who simply cried in happiness. Thank you, he finally whispered, pulling back and wiping his tears away. Feeling his happiness blossom within her, Rayla placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, we need to get moving. Where are we going to go? The human asked while they got to their feet. We're heading to Xadia. We get Cal home. We head to Xadia, we get Cal home, and we make peace between the humans, elves, and dragons. But Callum isn't strong enough to make that long of a trip. Ezran replied, holding his hand out towards the Dragon Prince. Callum stood by them, swaying a little on the spot. I'm fine, he managed after a moment, clearly lying. The elf frowned when she realized the human was right. We need somewhere to hide out for a few days while Callum gets its strength back. We also need to prepare for the trip. Ideas? How about the Banther Lodge? Ezran offered. I mean, it's where my dad was sending me, so he must have sent food for me as well. It's in the middle of nowhere, so it's quiet and not too far away from here. Problem, if your father was sending me there, it would be filled with humans. Not a safe place for a dragon and an elf. No, it's the Winter Lodge, so it'll be empty. Rayla frowned. Wait, so your father was going to send you to a lodge? Alone. Well, no, he would have sent me with some guards and staff. But since I kind of ran away, they won't be there now. Come on, we can at least look. It's not far. Considering the facts and the lack of options, Rayla nodded. All right, lead the way then. For the next few hours, the group walked through the forest, staying off any main path or roads, until they came to a clearing with a large building in the middle. The building before them had 2 floors with glass windows and was skillfully built with stone and wood, while surrounding it were luscious conifer trees. Rayla looked around, then frowned, turning to the boys. Stay here. I'm going to make sure there's no one around, she told them before running towards the lodge. Ezran, Bate, and Callum watched as she left, waited patiently until they saw the front door open. Rayla came out, waving her arms above her head as an all clear. She smiled as they got closer. Looks like you were right, Ez. All clear and stocked first day. She pointed to 4 large baskets that were behind the front door, each filled with food. Bread, dried meat, fruit, and even what looked like a box of jelly tarts. There's enough food here to keep us going for a while, and we can pack some to take with us. Great. I guess you've already looked around. Yeah, it's not a bad place to hide out. Callum looked around as well and nodded.
I like it.